Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Age of Quarantine. I'm David Castillo from Saint Vitus. Hope everybody's had a good week. There's a lot of shit going on. We have an election coming up. Please vote. You can vote early. Take the time. Do it. We also are doing a live stream show this weekend. It's going to benefit an amazing organization that works with black trans femmes in the arts. And a ton of amazing bands are doing it. Just all Halloween covers, members of Blue Anxiety, Warthog. I mean, pretty much who's who of New York punk and hardcore. So it's going to be great. Now, without further ado, we had an amazing first talk with Aaron Turner from ISIS, Sumac, and Old Man Gloom, a ton of projects, and he is kind enough to join us again to do part two because we only got through basically ISIS. So here we are. Aaron Turner is here, and we're really excited. So let's cheers to my boys at KCBC for drinking some of that good stuff. Hope everybody is doing well out there. Aaron.
Dave.
Same room, feeling it. I'm in a different room. I'm in my wife's sort of study. It's a new vibe for me, same vibe for you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's one room in the house that's basically designated for conversations that shouldn't be interrupted by our 4-year-old. It's not 100% guaranteed safety zone, but it usually does the trick.
Got it. I love that. So Aaron, thank you very much for joining us again. I said it even on the actual chat last time because, there's a lot. You're a prolific guy, and we basically only sort of got through basically like ISIS, really. So, along your journey, I think we need to tell everybody there's a part one, and we charted a lot of ISIS, and then we have to go into a lot of these sort of other projects and just like bring us into today. So if you want to know more about Aaron's early life and why he moved to Boston and all this really cool stuff, check out part one. But now we're here to pick it up in part two. And my first kind of question, I went back, I sort of, listened back to kind of where we ended up. And one thing that I wanted to begin this with, starting with kind of an ending for you. So what
Sure.
was it like to have ISIS end? Because I think that for a lot of people, it's always cool when everything's forming and everybody likes to hear those stories. But something ending is kind of a big deal, and especially something where maybe you've achieved a lot of the things you had set off to. How did that feel for you?
First of all, I just want to preface this with saying that I'm only speaking for myself. And the other guys in ISIS have been and are some of my closest friends. And I think we have different perspectives on what exactly happened. And I have had some conversations with them about our differing perspectives. And so that's just a way to say that my negative feelings about certain aspects of how things went down are only my perspective and have as much to do with what I feel like I did wrong as it does with the trajectory of the band or anybody else involved. But what I can say, kind of related to that, is that when we started, it was basically just friends who wanted to play together, and we didn't really have a specific set of goals. There was nothing we wanted to achieve other than to make music that made us happy. And a lot of the stuff that ended up happening for us in terms of, being able to tour regularly and essentially make a living from our music was just kind of a fringe benefit of following the path of doing what we wanted to do. But when it came to what I realized was the band winding down, at least for me, it wasn't an immediate process of realization. It was kind of a bit of a drawn out thing where I started having feelings about not being as enthusiastic about it as I once was. noticing that because we were together so often, we were becoming more like coworkers that were tolerating each other rather than friends that were really enjoying each other's company. And I think that's totally to be expected in this scenario. And I know from talking to a lot of other people who have been in bands long term that that's just the way it is. I mean, you're sharing small spaces with each other day after day, and it gets difficult.
Yeah. Just the very human aspects of these things. You know, it's like even though you're with people you're really close with, and you have this sort of, you know, amazing bond, not only on and off stage, relationships that are long term, they take a different sort of care, right? And to sort of be involved in. It's a really like intimate thing. And did you feel like maybe a little bit when you say you're kind of like coworkers and tolerating each other, did you feel like that vibe started seeping its way into kind of just other aspects of making music and doing things of that nature?
Yeah, definitely. And that became problematic as well, because I think we started feeling some kind of collective pressure to make it function on a practical level. It wasn't just about, you know, writing a record and letting it gestate for as long as it needed to. It was more about keeping up with this self-imposed cycle of production. And as I said, we never had any goals in the beginning or even group consensus about wanting to make it into a career.
Sure.
But then when people's livelihoods started becoming dependent on the band, I think it did place more of an emphasis on, as I said, the practical end of our existence rather than the creative impetus that we formed around. And you know, I'm grateful we got to do the things that we did, and it's amazing that we were able to, for a time, make a living from it. That said, I personally feel like I would rather make music that's creatively relevant at a pace that feels natural than try to adhere to something that really just feels like a business timeline.
Sure.
And I definitely think that, you know, the band becoming a business had a negative impact on the creative aspect of what we were doing.
Yeah, because it kind of like forces upon you a lot, like you said, schedules and bringing a lot of this sort of professionalism into a creative sort of context is always kind of a hard thing to manage, those sort of two poles of being like
Yeah,
wildly free, but then it's like show up and do this and do that.
yeah,
We got to get
yeah.
this out. And it's like rules and hedonism and expressionism and things of that nature, they don't tend to go hand in hand, right? Like,
No, no, they don't. And also, again, it was a collective of 5 different people with very different ideas about how to do things. And um, you know, that did have a big impact on the creative split as well. I think there was a period of time where we were able to occupy a territory that we all felt good about, and then as time went on, people, I think, started wanting to do different things, and that tension can be great when, you know, people who have different ideas and different sensibilities and different approaches, when they're melded together, can create something that's an interesting hybrid. And then on the same continuum, I think it can end up eventually resulting in compromise that doesn't create the same kind of really authentic end result. And that's the way I felt. I just felt like what I wanted to do wasn't really meshing with what other people had in mind, and our vision, our collective vision for the band became so divergent that it just couldn't withstand that tension anymore.
yeah, like it starts to implode a little bit, and sometimes it's like, you know what, maybe you need to go off and make this kind of record on your own, or something of that nature. And I really appreciate the candor here, because we're kind of starting just at the end here, but I think that it's important to kind of talk about it, because this will go on to make space in your life and your musical life, right? I this is a major thing to create all of the things that, you know, we're setting the scene that you've been sort of able to do since, right? Because like,
Yeah.
as you know, we ended with Heidegger. I'm going to go with Hegel now. It's creation is destruction, and destruction is creation, right? How did you feel when it wasn't there anymore, you know? and you were like, okay, did you feel a sense of freedom to kind of, I'm just going to go off and do all these different projects and just be Aaron?
No, I didn't feel that way, but that's not entirely because of ISIS ending. There was sort of a collision of multiple events in my life. ISIS ended. I moved out of Los Angeles. I ended a long personal relationship that was actually in many ways pretty difficult for me. And so pretty much everything in my life took a radical turn.
Wow.
And ultimately that ended up being a very positive thing, but the transition was not easy. I went from living in a big city to living in a rural place. I went from one relationship kind of into another without having enough time to really reestablish myself. So I was in a fucked up headspace for, I would say, at least 2 years after the disbanding of ISIS. And part of that was, you know, the band and what we did had defined my life, in the sense that it was like everything I did basically was structured around that. And all of a sudden, you know, 6 months of touring out of the year was gone. This group of people that I was a part of no longer gathered together. I was in a totally different place, and it was just a big turning point in my life. And I think I didn't necessarily feel freedom so much as I felt confusion. And it took a while for me to really kind of just calm down and decompress and go to therapy, you know, just like,
basically you're like rebuilding yourself, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And ultimately, as I said, the results were good, but it took me quite a while to reorient myself. I should also mention that I basically got sober at that point. I was a daily weed smoker throughout pretty much all of ISIS. And again, around the same time that the band broke up and I moved and everything else, I had to stop smoking weed because it just was no longer fun. It was making me depressed and paranoid. So most of the things I could change, I did change. And it took, I would say, a good few years before I was able to really start feeling the positive effects of having made these changes in my life.
I think that these are the things that are huge. You know, oftentimes people will be like, "Wow, Sumac is so great," or Mammoth, that Old Man Gloom record, or they'll look at that, but they're like, there are these tectonic shifts that happen in your personal life, other places that are really affecting your art and your approach and everything else as that sort of happened. I mean, not smoking weed or anything else like that. How did you feel about just, you know, making music under these new conditions? Did it feel a little bit strange, or what did it feel clearer? How did you feel about that?
There was kind of a spectrum of emotions about it. Mammoth was interesting for me because I was doing something that I'd never really done before, which was being in somebody else's band and just totally following their guide, following them as a guide. Faith pretty much set all of the creative parameters for Mammoth, and I had to figure out what I do as a musician and how that could relate to her vision for Mammoth. So in that sense, a lot of the pressure was taken off of me. In one way, I wasn't expected to really write music in the same way that I had been in ISIS. And then with Old Man Gloom has always been kind of a low pressure entity. You know, we've never been a full-time band, and we've never been really rigorous in our writing process. We really just are impulsive and kind of put down whatever we come up with at spur of the moment. So, you know, that was a totally different thing for me as well. It wasn't like trying to go through this long, arduous writing process. I didn't have to think about, you know, so many of the things that felt like pressures in ISIS were non-existent in Old Man Gloom. So it wasn't really parallel to my experience in Old Man Gloom. There was something interesting though, which I can think back on when I was starting to write stuff for the Old Man Gloom record that became No. And I really, you know, I experienced some burnout in ISIS where I just felt like I couldn't write anymore in a way that was compelling for me. I didn't feel like I could come up with heavy riffs that were interesting. I hit a wall. And so when I started writing for No, I really had to kind of unlearn some of my own bad habits, experiment with different tunings, and really just try to break myself out of that rut, and also stop putting so much pressure on myself. Kind of give myself permission to maybe write stuff that was boring or write stuff that wasn't good, throw it away and write something else.
Yeah, so sort of like not be so committed to even like the first idea, right? Like that's definitely something I had to learn a little bit too. It's like, you know what? It's like it's fine. Just it's gone, you know?
Yeah.
Everything's gonna be great, right? Like and to do that sort of thing. But it shows, I mean, guys, if it happens to Aaron Turner, it can happen to anybody.
I think it happens to
We all struggle
everybody.
in that creation and that thing, and at different points there's going to be new challenges and new like little pain points that are going to sort of come up and things of that nature. Speaking of Old Man Gloom, because I wanted to kind of get into that a little bit more, and you know, it's a really interesting thing because, you know, as you sort of pointed out, it's like a project band, you know, it sort of like comes together and then kind of goes away and then comes together and goes away with like incredible output. We've done some amazing shows at Saint Vitus and Old Man Gloom and stuff like that. How did that just come together? You know, it's a Boston thing. Like, you know, how did that just become?
It was a New Mexico thing. Santos and I started it together. He and I had known each other since high school, since we were 15, I think.
Oh my
and when I was still living in Boston, and I was still in college, I would often go home for the summer to New Mexico, at least for a month or two. And at the time I went back and Old Man Gloom formed, Santos was still living there. And it was basically just the result of us hanging out together and feeling like we needed to do something with our energy. And, you know, Santos and I have always had this friendship that's based around just, I don't know, jackassery, for lack of a better word. I mean, he brings a lot of levity into my life, and I tend to be overly serious at times. So our relationship is really healthy for me in that way. He helps me kind of like break out of that mode of seriousness. And that was kind of the idea for Old Man Gloom, was just to do something that was purely for fun, very spontaneous, done as quickly as possible. I wrote all the songs for the first record in an afternoon. We spent a week rehearsing them, and then
that's a good afternoon.
Yeah, and then we spent a day recording it, and maybe another day mixing it, and that was it.
That's so cool, because for you, it's a relationship, and a lot of people, like you were saying, like as we're going through all this stuff, different relationships, how people are making you feel, you respond to them, they responding to you, and you showing a different side of yourself. Like the cutting, like kind of wit and sarcasm in Old Man Gloom is always like super amazing and welcome. And it's like a completely different methodology. It's, instead of pouring over like a ISIS song for maybe a month or something or whatever, I feel like I wrote a record in an afternoon. That must have been pretty nice, right? Like something really like challenging to do. Right?
Challenging, yes, but also really freeing. And again, just thinking about doing something purely for the sake of doing it. And, you know, if you think about the term playing music, the word play is in there. And that is very much what the true essence of Old Man Gloom is allowing ourselves to kind of revert to that almost place of childlike freedom, where you don't really impose a lot of your supposedly mature judgment on what you're doing. You just act impulsively, and at times it could be a very crude expression, but I also feel like because of that that level of freedom that we allow ourselves, it's compelling in a really authentic way. And again, as you pointed out, a lot of it has to do with relationship, and that was pretty much the case from the beginning up to the present moment. It's it's as much an excuse for a group of friends to be together as it is a reason for, for people to come together and write music with a focused intent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it started in New Mexico. Santos and I did that first record. He was ready to make a change, and I was already in Boston, and he felt like, he didn't really have a specific reason to go anywhere, so why not go to Boston? And that was what led to the eventually expanded lineup, where we realized we had done something interesting with the first record. We wanted to continue, but we also felt like we were somewhat limited with just operating as just a duo. So that was when we ended up, first involving Nate and Luke, and then eventually Caleb a short time thereafter. And that kind of solidified the core lineup, at least for the first 4 records.
Yeah, amazing. And, really amazing stuff, and really cool, like just how you outlined everything, honestly. And it's cool to, just how different things can get pulled out of you, and as you kind of go through different relationships, eras and epics, how things sort of really change in terms of approach and style and things of that nature. Speaking of relationship, I mean, I think obviously meeting Faith, who's now a mother of your child, lovely, amazing artist in her own right. Like you said, you're in her band with Mammofer and stuff like that. I think that's obviously another big, turning point in your life personally, but also so many projects have sort of come out of your actual relationship. How did that sort of come about, and what's it like kind of playing with somebody that you do share all these other aspects of life with so intimately?
I think good personal relationship has been at the foundation of almost all of the rewarding creative partnerships that I've been a part of. And again, just backtracking to Old Man Gloom, part of the reason I think we've been able to last as long as we have is because it was formed out of, a childhood friendship that Santos and I shared. Faith and I came together in sort of the opposite direction, where instead of being friends initially, our first interactions were based around sort of mutual creative interest. And I encountered her music when she was a part of a group called Ever Lovely Lightning Heart, who we ended up releasing a few records for on Hydra Head. But I first encountered her music when she had an installation with her band partner, Chris Badger, at Otis in Los Angeles. And I heard the music from a few rooms away and was immediately drawn in by it. And so I followed the sounds into this room where they had their installation, and that was my first exposure to Faith's music. And it really was one of those things where the instant I heard it, there was something about it that was completely captivating to me. And so that moment of first hearing her music, and then subsequently making contact with her and with Chris and releasing Everlovely stuff, that was what led to her asking me to play on the first Mammofer record, Isis and Everlovely doing some shows together, and then kind of parallel to me first being involved in Mammofer, our personal relationship started evolving from there. And now it's turned into this thing where our lives are interwoven heavily, both on a personal level as well as a creative level. Aside from doing Mammofer together, she's also contributed pieces to the last couple of Old Man Gloom records. She's contributed keyboard, piano, and organ to every Sumac record so far. And we run Siege together, our record label. So, our lives are very much tied together in all those aspects, which is mostly good and also necessary because we're both just artists and we need to be able to understand that we both have this impetus to be creative. But there's also times where it can be difficult because those lines get so blurry. And, things in a band context can end up becoming more heavily loaded because of our personal relationship. So it takes some careful navigating, and it's it's been necessary for me to become a much better communicator, because typically, in my life historically, I have not been a great communicator, at least verbally. So this has been a big thing for me, to try to figure out how to really balance those two things, without feeling like, without feeling overwhelmed by any of it, which, does happen from time to time.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, and that's sort of the thing, because as you're kind of just creating this sort of creative life, and now you're creating it with a partner of mine, and now, but those things are now bleeding into one another, and I'm like, okay, he's a Mammofer with Faith, and we got Summer of 17, we got Wait, and she's playing on Sumac records. I'm like, there's a lot of crossover, so it's just an interesting sort of balance and running the label and everything like that. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is, for us on the outside, we're loving this. This is great output, really cool shit. So we're like super happy. I remember maybe not the first time I saw Mammoth, but the last time I saw it was in Portland. And you were playing together, and you also had Brian Cook playing bass, and it was just it's a beautiful show, super cool. And Daniel Mensch was also part of the lineup that night, and that was the first time I'd sort of heard of him and like his music and stuff like that, who's now also sort of become like a larger collaborator of yours. And it feels like, you have the project band with like Old Man Gloom that was happening, from time to time, and then after ISIS, but I felt like you were exploring kind of different things, and then with meeting Faith and other people. What was it like to kind of have this sort of free spirit of collaboration happening, stuff with Kaiji Hano? Like, I love that sort of approach, and how you kind of did a lot of that.
Yeah, being open to a lot of different creative relationships has been very rewarding for me. And again, just backtracking a little bit, part of the thing that became problematic for me with ISIS was that it ended up dominating so much of my time that I wasn't able to do some other projects that I was really interested in, just because it was practically difficult. And like for instance, sort of in the earlier half of ISIS's existence, I was also doing Lotus Eaters and House of Low Culture, and some of the early Old Man Gloom stuff happened at that same time. And as my then personal relationship with my partner got more difficult, and as ISIS became busier and busier, those projects just kind of faded away. And the more I was devoting all of my energy to just one musical pursuit, the more constricted I felt. And so that was one of the things I also learned about myself through the process of being in ISIS for so long, is that I can't just be in one band. One band, no matter how much I love it, no matter how much I love the people involved, cannot satisfy all of my creative impulses. So, in the subsequent years, I've realized that anytime I am involved with someone that I really like on a personal level, and or find really interesting as a creative person, I'm going to get something out of it, and it's going to enrich my experience of being an artist. It's going to expand my palette in terms of what I can do. The feedback loop that happens between collaborators helps widen my perspective and challenge me to do different things and to think differently and to respond differently. And so that has been, a very central part of my creative practice, is to play with as many people as is possible without overextending myself. And, at times I have overextended myself, and there have been times where I have felt a rather immense guilt for drawing out these projects, things that were initiated, years in the past, and it's taken me, 3 years to complete. But overall, I would say this diversified approach to being a musician has been really, really great. I've forged some great personal relationships. My music has evolved, and I have made what I now feel like is a pretty diverse body of work, while also, figuring out how my specific voice um, can be channeled in conjunction with other people, where my voice is still present, but can also be connected to and complementary to the creative voice of other people.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And like, there's going to be like an innate Aaron Turner-ness to you. Like everybody has like a signature. You hear Dave Lombardo play drums, I'm like, that's the guy. Like that's what he sounds like, you know. And using it where it's like, you know, like an ingredient where like if you put a lot of salt in, it's like, you know, but you need some salt in the food. You need to create those balances and stuff like that. And sometimes you want certain flavors to be very forward or maybe a little bit behind, depending on what the task is, what dish you're creating, right? Like what it is, and having that restraint is like a really kind of, you know, I think really important part. And it's cool to see somebody of yourself go and be like, I'm going to be in this person's band and I'm going to just play and it's going to be cool, you know, after being at the helm for so long. A lot of I feel like some of those sort of explorations too are really kind of like, I felt like very like noise and very avant-garde, sort of like driven and really pushing out the edges, like not quite, you know, what we consider like typical heavy music or you know, even like super guitar driven or anything of that nature, which is really kind of, you know, what people, if Isis Old Man Gloom was where you were at, or, you know, they would sort of feel that. But, you know, if you go through your catalog in Hydra Head, it seemed like you had an interest in a lot of that music. What was it like kind of getting into maybe some different worlds too? Did that feel good?
It did. And that was part of my musical, that was part of what informed my musical sensibilities too, was becoming interested in bands or artists that straddled the lines between different genres and different practices. And some of the most influential artists for me were those that didn't have a clearly delineated genre that they were a part of. The distinction I'll make here, though, is that I've never really been a fan of music where it's like, it feels like a cut up, where it's just genre hopping from piece to piece, you know, where it's like a section of this kind of music and a section of that kind of music. I mean, of course, there are exceptions, but it's more the idea of new hybrids that are created when people are pulling influences from different sectors. And a really good example that I think of as far back as high school is Neurosis, because clearly they started with a very punk approach to what they were doing. But by the time they reached, especially Enemy of the Sun, which was my gateway record for them, it was like music that didn't really belong anywhere, but pulled in so many things that for me were really captivating. I mean, I kind of disavowed metal for a while when I first got into punk and hardcore. I really just felt like the metal mentality really bothered me, and the more socially conscious orientation of punk and hardcore was where it was at for me. But I also really missed the aesthetics of metal. And so, you know, Neurosis, when I first heard Enemy of the Sun, I was like, this is the heaviness that I've been missing. And this is the darkness and the dissonance that I've been missing in a lot of the punk and hardcore I listened to, but they're coming from that background. And then they were also pulling from stuff that I wasn't even aware of yet, like Swans and things like that. And so that was my gateway into discovering other things too, like Crash Worship and Swans, bands that were, you know, drawing from not just the world of punk and metal, but also, you know, industrial and noise, and, you know, in some cases, even kind of avant-garde classical music. So when I started discovering those kinds of bands, Neurosis, Godflesh, Swans, and seeing where they were coming from, you know, that really pulled me in some other directions, and it started opening me up to this whole other world of sonic aesthetic interests. And from there, it turned into Earth and Mersbow and Masana and some of the stuff that Relapse was doing. Again, that was kind of another gateway for me. The fact that Relapse had their release sub-label where they were doing Lull and Masana and, you know, these more sort of left field things was another
really, you know,
important portal.
You know, Japanese noise greatness, you know, Masana and Mersbow and stuff like that. And, you know, it's just interesting to sort of see where you could definitely, you know, you're pulling from all these different sort of things. And what you were saying with, you know, just opening the channels to sort of see what else you can sort of bring into kind of your own scope, and not letting it be like a social thing. You know, sometimes it's like, you know, where it's like, oh, okay, like I'm open to the aesthetics of like a lot of different things, and then I'll channel it into my own sort of blend of what I want to kind of project onto the world, right? And sometimes those things seem incongruous, but if you can find the appropriate channels or different things, you can really pick up a lot and continue to kind of forge your own path.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I learned through all that, through my exposure to a lot of different kinds of music, was that my interest in sort of sonic extremity didn't lie just in the realm of metal. I mean, I think the kind of overwhelming total sensory saturation that you experience by listening to something like Mersbow, for me, is very similar to the same sort of saturated sensory experience of listening to Neurosis, where it's just like this completely immersive, full body experience. And I started discovering that existed in so many other forms, and that was really highly compelling to me, was to realize that, you know, there was a kind of approach and an adventurous nature to musical exploration that I was drawn to, more so than any specific kind of genre oriented pathways. And again, that just kept leading me down so many other different channels. And I discovered a lot of different things where there was people operating in other sectors with similar mindsets. Like another one that comes to mind that's super important is Dialect. I remember I saw Dialect in the church in Philly, maybe 99, 2000, something like that. And they were very clearly a hip hop band, but obviously pulling from many of the same sources that I was interested in and that ISIS was utilizing. And though the final form was quite different, the spirit and the essence and the heaviness were all parallel. So those have kind of been my kindred spirits, as people who are doing the same thing and maybe have very different end results, but the same sort of creative ideology.
Yeah, I can't agree with you enough. And in a lot of ways, that's sort of what, you know, we try to embody in the spirit of Saint Vitus as like a club, you know, is creating just a platform, a place for all of these sort of kind of diverse explorations of kind of heaviness and darker sides of music, you know. At our best, that's what we can really sort of be, I think. And, you know, and all these different little flavors of kind of underground music, but mainly exploring those things. And it's stuff like this that kind of gives us the sort of the framework. So it's really cool to hear you talk about all of that stuff. Now we got to, I mean, I feel like we've hit all the explorations of that thing, but then all of a sudden, some years ago, Sumac starts coming into focus. And I think everybody was sort of excited, at least on the fan side, because you're like, whoa, this is an Aaron Turner heavy band, and like an Aaron Turner authored feeling heavy band. And it felt like, okay, the dude is back. He's coming in with some like really guitar driven heavy shit. And when I first heard it, I mean, first of all, I love Baptists. I love Nick Yakshin's an insane drummer, incredible dude. I remember the first time I ever met him at Vitus, I gave him shit because I tried to get Baptists to fly to St. Vitus, but they never got it together. I'm still but when I just heard about the people involved. I was so excited to just my imagination started running with it, because there's Brian Cook, Nick, and yourself. Tell me about how that sort of came together, and how did you kind of, put that together?
Well, this goes back to where our conversation began, sort of with the end of ISIS, and sort of the last two album cycles that ISIS were in, with In the Absence of Truth and Wavering Radiant. There was things I was trying to bring into ISIS that I didn't really yet have the skills or the focus to articulate, and also that I don't know would have been necessarily welcome in that framework. And then after ISIS disbanded, I really didn't feel like being in a band that was that full-time. I didn't feel like being a person who was largely responsible for the bulk of the songwriting that was happening, or at least, basic parts that were the foundations for songs. And it took me a few years to really start feeling like I was in this headspace again to start something completely new, a guitar-oriented heavy rock band, essentially. And once I started thinking about that, I really had to let the ideas gestate for a while before actually taking any action. Part of that was about where I wanted the music itself to go and how I would form those ideas. And then the other component, equally as important, was who I was going to do it with. And obviously the key in many bands is the relationship between, a songwriter or a guitar player and the rhythm section. And I really just knew I had to find the right drummer to play with in order for the things I had in my mind to take the shape that I wanted them to have. And part of it was about ingenuity in terms of approach to playing and writing style, and part of it was also about physical intensity, because with the kind of music I wanted to play, physical intensity and the physicality of the music itself were very important for how I wanted the music to come across. So I wanted to find a drummer that, was intensely physical in the way they played, and also displayed the kind of ideas that I was hoping could be complementary to what I was, starting to sketch out for what became Sumac. And I think I probably spent maybe a year and a half or 2 years thinking on it and just sort of casually looking around before I really settled on working with Nick. And even that was kind of like a slow process at first. I saw him playing Baptist in Seattle, and I was immediately blown away. I mean, I was laughing because of how insane his performance was. I mean, that's a sign for me when something is truly great, when you just start laughing uncontrollably because something is just so amazing, essentially. And after their set was over, I clearly remember thinking, that's the kind of drummer I want to play with. But I didn't know Nick at all. I knew they were Canadian, and it didn't really occur to me to just basically cold call him and be like, hey, do you want to play together? And so it was almost a year from that point until I had a conversation with Kurt Ballou, and I said, Kurt, I want to start a new band. I've been having trouble finding a good drummer that I feel like is going to be sympathetic to what I want to do. Do you have any ideas? And he said, well, one of my favorite drummers is Nick Yakishin, and I think maybe, I've worked with him and I've worked with you, and I feel like you guys could get along. And I said, I saw him play. He's awesome. Please put us in touch. And so that was the beginning of Sumac really taking shape.
Kurt, you're producing everything, man. Producing the shit out of the world.
Yeah, I really do have to thank Kurt for making that final connection. And, by that point, I won't say I was necessarily desperate, but I was really getting to the point where I was like, okay, I haven't found anybody in Seattle. Vancouver's not so far away. Maybe we can make this international relationship work. And so I got in touch with Nick. We had one informal session together. I felt great about it. He apparently had a good time as well. We made some very basic demos. And, we continued to talk over the next 2 months, and then just decided, okay, I'm going to write a bunch of stuff. we're going to get together for a week and rehearse it. And then we're going to record and see what happens. And at that point, I had Brian in my mind as the potential third person. Brian and I have known each other for a long time. I love Brian as a person. I love him as a bass player. But I knew that I had to find the drummer first, figure that out, and then figure out the bass. So after I had kind of settled on this thing with Nick and knew that it was really going to happen, I approached Brian and I said, Brian, I'm starting a new band. I want it to kind of be a real band, not just like a project thing that happens every now and again. What do you think? And he said yes, with the stipulation that it was clear that, you know, he would be involved in recordings and touring when he could, but Russian Circles had to be his, you know, his priority. And I think that was a good thing to establish, because again, when people are involved in so many different things, if you don't communicate clearly about what your needs are, things can get messy very quickly. And
yeah, don't be taking that Russian Circles away from me.
I would never dream of it. I am not a home wrecker.
Yeah,
I want to be friends with the people I'm involved with. I want them to be, you know, chill with their situations. So
yeah.
Anyway, that was the formation of the band. And the other part of it, which I just sort of referenced, was that clear communication had to be there from the get-go, because again, that was where some of the trouble started with ISIS, is that we came together when, you know, 3 of us were still 19 and, you know, not good communicators, and that never really developed those skills. And I realized how much that hampers at a band's ability to operate. So
yeah, you're laying a foundation now with the experience and the knowledge of knowing all of the parts of music, not just making it, right?
Yeah, like, exactly. Yeah.
Everything else that you talked about for 2 hours. Now you're like, okay, everybody, like, go and really like approach this. And it's a really beautiful thing, because I've seen you with Brian, without Brian, but the record's very much so like his playing is super, it's so him and evocative and great. And what I feel like Sumac in reality for me is like really a culmination of a lot of your journey too, because you know you did a record with Kaiji and did things of that nature. You know, there are these big expansive moments of just like really beautiful, like soft building, and then harsher like noise and sound, and then boom, ripping into like more, you know, percussive rock metal kind of vibe. You know, it seems like this is Aaron Turner sort of personified, and I think that's what people were sort of looking for in a way. Like, this is like your vehicle. It's been authored that way. And with Nick, it creates a whole new percussive level too, even within the sort of the riffs and the interplay there. It's really pretty, you know, wild. And, you know, seeing it at Vitus a couple times, seeing, you know, just the interplay, it's something to really behold. And, you know, I can't wait till we can have you guys back to play, because it is really cool. And it's, for anybody watching, you know, who may have checked out all of Aaron's other bands, you have to check out Sumac. It's really a unique experience, I feel like.
I feel like it's the culmination of everything I have wanted to do with music. And of course, it's not an end point, because, you know, I hope the band itself will continue to exist and evolve, and I'll have a much longer journey, I hope, for years to come. That said, this project, this band, has come closer to embodying everything I wanted to do with a band in one unit. And I know that I said earlier, I don't want to be stuck in just one band, but this, for me, satisfies so many of the different things that I wanted to do musically. And my first interest as a musician is as a guitar player, and my primary interest, musically speaking, is guitar-oriented rock. However, I feel like they've been able to take that palette and also incorporate improvisation, incorporate noise and space and musical ideas of deconstructionism. So this does, in a very authentic way for me, synthesize so many of my musical interests. And I feel like I would not have been able to arrive at this point if I hadn't gone through all the other experiences of being in ISIS, collaborating with so many other people in different circumstances, um, gaining the insights of age. I mean, I don't think I would have been able to do this band as a 20-year-old. I really had to get basically to age 40-ish to be able to have the wisdom and the skills and the artistic experience to make this what it is. So, you know, again, as a person who makes music in a public forum, I want people to know about everything I'm involved with. I feel like all of it reveals different aspects of my interests. If there were one thing I had to direct people to, it would be this. It is the distillation of everything that is important to me musically. And again, it also has so much to do with relationship. My relationship with Nick and Brian as friends and as collaborators works so wonderfully. And I'm exceptionally grateful that it's actually come together in the way that it has.
Yeah, it's super, it's great. And like, I see that, right? Everything you say, I hear it. I literally can hear it, you know? And I'm like, oh, this is him hanging out with Daniel and hanging out with Dominic and bringing these things in, and Boris, and like all of these different modes and these different people you played with and stuff. And I was like, holy crap, this is what, wow, okay, we're doing this. We're doing like the whole thing. And then the stuff with Kaiji, I was like, wow, we're not afraid to keep moving this and letting all the different edges sort of show. And that's, for me personally, as a listener and a long-time fan, it's really fucking cool. I'm like, I love that this is not just like, okay, this is the heavy thing over here, and then this is like kind of the noise stuff, and then because it's like, no, this is Sumac, and it's becoming its own kind of entity that just you're gonna want to pay attention to in this really like sort of, you know, unexpected way. You know, I don't really know what the next thing is going to sort of be like.
Me either.
The new record's going to come out, and I heard, you know, the one song that's out, Iron Chair, I believe is the name.
Yeah, and the full record is out now. Yeah.
Oh, and all right, cool. So I got to catch up because last night I got really high and listened to Summer of 17. So that's really where my head was at, because I'm trying to keep up with Aaron Turner. So before we close this out, we have a couple minutes left and stuff like that. And I wanted to make some room for Summer of 17, because I was like, whoa, I saw you post it not too long ago. And actually, Caroline from Saint Vitus mentioned in the post for this that like, oh, Aaron's got some new stuff out. I'm sure he'll talk about it. And I was like, oh shit, I haven't listened to it. So that was last night. And then I saw the lineup too, and I was like, whoa, this is like kind of the less rock side sort of like list of Faith and Daniel, and like, whoa, like this list of collaborators in this one project. That's really cool. How did that sort of come together? And it's a really cool record. Awesome to listen to at like midnight.
Nocturnal music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an apt description. This really, we jokingly, before we had a band name, we jokingly referred to it as Team Siege, because all of the people involved are people we've released records for on Siege. And that was the kind of the impetus for doing this, was all of us getting together to play shows together. Monica doing Nordra, William Fowler Collins doing his solo set, Daniel doing his solo set, and maybe William and I also doing our duo as Thalassa, Faith doing Mara. So we did some shows together, and we figured that if we were doing that and we were all going to be together anyway, it would be a great opportunity for us to record. We asked Randall Dunn to facilitate. All of us have worked with him in some capacity or another. And he's a great creative collaborator, especially when there's a lot of different people involved and there's no clear parameters. He's kind of good at corralling people and setting things up. So again, this all has to do with relationship. People who like each other, who get along well, who have a creative connection. And we knew enough about each other that we thought that, at least in theory, there's enough common ground that we should be able to come together to create something interesting. And it turned out that also in practice, it was a very effective commingling of ideas where, you know, everybody's personality is on display, but it also becomes its own unique thing as it is. It doesn't just sound like this is Daniel's part, this is Faith's part, this is Monica's part, and William's part, and my parts kind of smushed together. It really coalesced into this very cohesive thing. And for me, that is again kind of central to what I want to get out of my practice, is trying something, not knowing what the results will be, being completely surprised by the process, and if I'm lucky, giving birth to some interesting results.
Yeah, I think
So
that,
with this process, sorry, I'll just say, with the recording process, we recorded a lot of material in a short period of time. Randall mixed it, and then Monica kind of acted as the editor, which I think was maybe one of the most important aspects of the creative process, because we were honestly overwhelmed by how much material there was, and it was really hard to find our way through it all and figure out what the important pieces were. So Monica acted sort of as like the director, editor, and found these concise movements that, when they were all compiled and conjoined in the right way, made for a really interesting narrative arc.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that it's really interesting to just sort of see how everyone can kind of, you know, come together in that way. And it's, you've built a little community around yourselves to kind of create all of these different things. And I think that's what's really cool about Siege, and also really cool about, you know, just basically how you've really gone about your creative life and practice and your musical life, and how, you know, you kind of have learned these lessons in the past and have kind of continued to grow and then create, and the lessons that you learn, how you're putting them into practice now from a personal standpoint, like the pragmatic nature of behind the scenes to set the stage for all the new experiences and new kind of like launch points that we have for all the music that you're creating now. And to me, that's super inspirational and super cool. And seeing how over different, you know, points in time, like, you've been able to do that and create new stuff. And for everybody who's listening and hanging out, you know, check out Siege. It's an awesome record label. It's got so much cool, diverse, interesting stuff Aaron's been putting out. I mean, I'm like, keeping up with Aaron and the different releases, and there's a ton of great stuff out there.
I would also have to give much credit to Faith for this as well, because lots of the output is hers, and she was also the person who essentially started the label. And again, much like Mammifer, it was sort of her thing, and she's allowed me to participate, and it's since become more of a full partnership, but she's as much a part of it as I am.
Oh, definitely, absolutely. And I think it's very obvious, if you've ever been in a room with Aaron and Faith, how much of, like, it's just, I'm like, these two are just functioning. Like, it's like you don't even talk, and like, it's just, there's such communication. And so, you know, everything's sort of laid out on and off stage. It just, you can see it. I see bands work all the time, you know. I can kind of know when I'm like, ooh, this is new, these are young kids, or not. They don't really kind of know. It's like a very well-oiled machine, and it's really cool. And that's why you're able to play as much as you can, to have the output that you can, because of those lessons that you've learned, you know, over time, and you know, get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, there's been good stuff along the whole way. There's just, like anything else, there's a lot to learn in the process.
Absolutely. Well, Aaron, we're close to ending now, so thank you so much. Really appreciate you and everything. Looking forward to all the creative output, and obviously to have you through our doors again. Thank you for taking the time, man. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it.
Have a good one, man. Take care.
Bye-bye.